Slate chief political correspondent Jamelle Bouie joins us now from Washington. Jamelle, thanks for being with us. As we just heard, Carly Fiorina had some pretty significant moments last night. Did she do what she needed to do at that debate?
I think she did. I think she really showed that she was extremely capable and ready to be on that stage and ready to be in the top tier of Republican candidates. You know, I will say that the one thing that was striking about her performance and really striking about all the performances on stage is that they were able, a lot of the candidates were able to do very well while sidestepping very important substantive questions. So, for example, Fiorina talked eloquently about drug addiction and drug treatment, but neither she nor anyone else who talked about it mentioned the Affordable Care Act and their commitment to repealing it, despite the fact that it provides money for exactly those kinds of programs. So I'd say as an observer, it was very much a nice trick on part of everyone, but Fiorina in particular, to be able to come across as articulate and cogent and smart without really touching the kind of substance that might actually be divisive and reveal something about their plans as president.
Let's talk about Donald Trump. There are a lot of critics out today saying that he was low energy. What did you think of his performance?
I think low energy is the right way to describe Trump last night. He obviously went into that thinking that he was going to come out on top, but everyone was gunning for him. And I think among the candidates trying to swat him down, Fiorina did do the best. And I think her willingness to kind of get into a fight with Trump really diminished him. He didn't know how to respond when he couldn't dominate the way he could Jeb Bush. Eventually, throughout that debate, he was able to get the better hand of Jeb Bush or other candidates. So I think coming out of this, I'm not going to say that Trump is going to be diminished, because as we've seen for the past month or so, it's very difficult to make a prediction about what happens to Donald Trump. But my hunch is that he does see a decline, and that Trump ends up being like a Herman Cain or a Newt Gingrich, someone who saw a bubble and will eventually come back down to earth.
Jamelle, let's talk about Chris Christie. He didn't get the chance to speak as much as the other candidates, so you really got the crowd going, though, at one point. Let's listen to some of that.
While I'm as entertained as anyone by this personal back and forth about the history of Donald and Carly's career, for the 55-year-old construction worker out in that audience tonight who doesn't have a job, who can't fund his child's education, I got to tell you the truth. They could care less about your careers. They care about theirs. Let's start talking about that on this stage, and stop playing the games. John, I'm not done yet, John.
A track record of leadership is not a game. It is the issue in this election.
Carly, listen, you can interrupt everybody else on the stage, you can't interrupt me, okay? The fact is that we don't want to hear about your careers, back and forth and volleying back and forth about who did well and who did poorly. You're both successful people. Congratulations. You know who's not successful? The middle class in this country, who's getting plowed over by Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. Let's start talking about those issues tonight and stop this childish back and forth between the two of you.
Okay, so there was another moment, Jamelle. What does Chris Christie do now? How do you think he'll fare moving forward?
I think how Christie fares depends a lot on how Jeb Bush and Scott Walker and John Kasich and Marco Rubio fare. He's kind of on the more, I'd say the most moderate of the kind of establishment Republicans, and whether or not he can kind of get a hold depends on whether or not establishment Republicans in the electorate decide that the other choices just aren't good enough. And right now, I think between Bush, even with his weaknesses, between Rubio and especially with Kasich, who I think did very well on that stage last night, Christie still seems like a marginal choice. He might see an improvement, and I think he will get some plaudits for trying to bring the conversation back to the economy and back to, concrete issues and not just sort of a resume contest. But I struggle to see how he makes gains given the fact that this is a crowded field of establishment candidates.
How about Marco Rubio? He made the most of his moments talking about immigration, particularly highlighting his family heritage. Let's take a listen to him for a moment.
I want to tell you a story about someone that didn't speak English that well. It was my grandfather. He came to this country in the 1960s as escaping Cuba, and he lived with us growing up. And my grandfather loved America. He understood what was so special about this country. He loved Ronald Reagan. He would be very proud of the fact that we're here this evening. My grandfather instilled in me the belief that I was blessed to live in the one society in all of human history where even I, the son of a bartender and a maid, could aspire to have anything and be anything that I was willing to work hard to achieve. But he taught me that in Spanish. because it was the language he was most comfortable in. And he became a conservative even though he got his news in Spanish. And so I do give interviews in Spanish, and here's why. Because I believe that free enterprise and limited government is the best way to help people who are trying to achieve upward mobility. And if they get their news in Spanish, I want them to hear that directly from me, not from a translator at Univision.
Was he able to break out from the pack after listening to him?
I think so. Marco Rubio, I think unique among the candidates, has a really great ability to connect biography to policy to sort of aspiration. At the same time, I mean, what's funny is that a lot of these lines are lines he said before. They're kind of rehearsed lines, but he says them very well. He says them in a way that really convinces you that they're coming from the heart in that moment. And he's able to connect those lines and connect that kind of aspirational narrative to concrete policy, which is a talent that not very many people have in politics in general, and certainly not that many people running for the Republican nomination. So of all the people there, I continue to think that Marco Rubio is probably the best and most talented politician. Whether or not that's enough to get him to the place where he can overtake his opponents is a different question.
All right, to be continued. Jamelle Bouie from Slate, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.